What I'm about to tell you will fundamentally change how you understand global power in the 21st century. While most people were distracted by headlines and news cycles, the largest transfer of economic and military influence since the end of World War II happened right under our noses. And here's what makes this absolutely critical for investors and ordinary citizens alike. This wasn't a sudden catastrophe that nobody could have predicted. This was a carefully orchestrated transition that took years to plan. By the time you finish listening to this, you'll understand why the next decade of your financial life depends on grasping what just happened, and why conventional wisdom about global dominance is about to cost millions of people their retirement savings. Let me start by asking you something. When was the last time you actually thought about the invisible architecture that makes your daily life possible? I'm talking about the vast, intricate web of alliances, treaties, and relationships that determine whether your currency holds its value, whether your investments grow, and whether the global system that your prosperity depends on continues to function. For 75 years, that architecture had a specific structure. And in just 72 hours, that structure didn't just crack, it shattered completely, and it's never coming back. This isn't about politics. This is about cold, hard economics and the brutal mathematics of power in the international system. What I'm going to walk you through today is how a single announcement set off a chain reaction that will reshape where money flows, which currencies dominate, which companies survive, and which nations hold the keys to the global economy for the next generation. So let's start with what actually happened. A major Western nation announced withdrawal from a 75-year-old military alliance that had been the foundation of the post-war order. This alliance wasn't just another international organization. It represented an ironclad guarantee that created preferential market access, established global weapons standards, and most importantly, maintained currency dominance for the leading nation. The announcement was framed as standing up for national interests and forcing partner nations to contribute more fairly. The underlying assumption was simple. The partners need us more than we need them, and they'll come back with better terms. But here's the problem with that assumption. It was completely, catastrophically wrong. When markets opened the morning after this announcement, something strange happened. European defense stocks that analysts predicted would drop 10 to 15% barely moved. Rheinmetall, BAE Systems, Leonardo, Saab, these stocks should have been in free fall. Instead, they dipped slightly, then recovered. Some even closed higher. If you understand how markets work, you know that prices reflect information. When something catastrophic happens and prices don't crash, it means the market knows something the general public doesn't. And in this case, what the market knew was that Europe had stopped counting on this alliance's reliability years ago and had been quietly preparing alternatives. What happened 72 hours after the announcement changed everything. Europe didn't scramble or panic. Instead, they unveiled something that was clearly in development for years, the European Defense Union. This is a $2 trillion integrated command and procurement structure that was already financed, already operational, and already included global partners with full decision-making authority. Canada, Japan, South Korea, Australia, Norway, these had full procurement rights and voting power in this new alliance. Let that sink in for a moment. While leadership was operating under the assumption that European nations were dependent and had no alternatives, those nations had been building the most sophisticated alternative alliance structure in modern history. This is the largest peacetime transfer of military and economic power since the end of World War II. Now here's where this gets really interesting from an economic perspective. For 75 years, the old alliance came with a crucial requirement. Interoperability. Member nations needed their military systems to work seamlessly together, which in practice meant European nations often bought equipment from the dominant partner, even when they had domestic alternatives. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, General Dynamics, these companies had a structural advantage baked into the alliance itself. That advantage has now disappeared permanently. The European Defense Union has its own interoperability requirements, and those requirements favor European manufacturers. Going forward, when European nations modernize their militaries, they're going to buy from Airbus, Dassault, Rheinmetall, and Saab. And those partner countries, Japan, South Korea, Australia, they're no longer locked into the previous systems either. Let me give you a sense of the scale. This isn't just replacing existing capabilities. This is a complete build-out of an independent defense architecture. Europe is creating its own satellite networks, command and control systems, next-generation fighter aircraft, and naval production. Estimates suggest that over the next decade, this could grow to $4 or even $5 trillion in total spending. Major defense contractors have just been locked out of the largest military buildup in a generation. But the defense spending itself is only the beginning. In the modern world, defense and technology are inseparable. Advanced military systems require artificial intelligence, quantum-resistant encryption, hypersonic materials, and directed energy weapons. When you cut firms out of European defense spending, you're cutting them out of the research and development ecosystem that has helped maintain technological edges over competitors. European defense budgets have historically funded significant dual-use technology research. That funding is now going to European research institutions, universities, and startups. And this brings us to perhaps the most consequential aspect of this entire shift: currency dominance. For decades, one currency has been the world's reserve currency, giving that nation what economists call an exorbitant privilege. They can borrow more cheaply, run larger deficits, and print money when needed without immediately triggering inflation, because the entire world needs that currency for international trade. But that privilege rests on three pillars: economic size, financial market depth, and the role as global security guarantor. That third pillar is now crumbling. If you're a country that depends on security guarantees from a dominant power, you hold their currency reserves. You need their currency to buy their weapons systems. You price exports in their currency. You hold their bonds because their military power makes those bonds safe. The entire architecture of currency dominance was built on security relationships. And now that architecture is being systematically dismantled. As Europe builds out this independent defense structure, they're going to conduct more transactions in euros. Japan and South Korea will use yen and won. When Australia buys defense equipment from European manufacturers, they're not routing that transaction through the previous dominant currency. The demand for those reserves is going to erode gradually at first, then rapidly. And when that demand erodes, the ability to finance deficits cheaply erodes with it. Interest rates will have to rise to attract buyers. The cost of servicing debt will increase. The feedback loops that have sustained economic dominance will start running in reverse. The composition of the European Defense Union partners matters tremendously. Every country brings something strategically essential that reduces dependency on previous supply chains. Canada provides rare earth minerals critical for advanced electronics. Japan brings semiconductor manufacturing, the foundational technology of the 21st century economy. South Korea offers world-class shipbuilding capacity. Australia provides access to critical minerals. Norway brings Arctic expertise and access. These nations were chosen specifically because together they create a supply chain that minimizes previous dependencies. The architects of this alliance looked at every potential choke point and systematically built alternatives. This is grand strategy at its finest, and it was years in the making. And here's something almost nobody is talking about yet: military installations. There are more than 70 significant military bases on European soil. For decades, these bases operated under the framework of mutual defense agreements. The host countries provided land, often at favorable terms, because these bases were part of a mutual arrangement. But those agreements have just been voided. Europe is now going to start asking hard questions about these bases. Why should they continue hosting military infrastructure under preferential terms when the mutual defense commitment no longer exists? Should lease terms be renegotiated at market rates? Don't be surprised if over the next several years, European countries either dramatically increase hosting costs or decline to renew agreements entirely. Hundreds of thousands of jobs in the defense and logistics sectors depend on this infrastructure. So now let's talk about what this means for you as an investor. Defense stocks from the previously dominant nation are going to face long-term repricing. Companies built business models around the assumption of continued access to allied markets. That access is gone. Yes, they'll still have domestic customers, but the growth trajectories that justified their valuations depended on expanding international sales. You're going to see downgrades, reduced earnings forecasts, and multiple compression. Conversely, European defense stocks are now long-term structural holds. Rheinmetall, Thales, Leonardo, Saab, these companies are about to experience sustained government-backed revenue growth that's almost unprecedented in peacetime. And it's not just the prime contractors. Look down the supply chain. Companies like Hensoldt for sensors, Kongsberg for precision systems. These second and third tier players are going to be swept up in this wave of spending. The currency implications are equally significant. The euro is going to see structural strengthening as demand increases for European Defense Union procurement. This isn't short-term speculation. This is a fundamental shift in global currency demand patterns. If you have significant holdings concentrated in one currency with no euro exposure, you need to think carefully about rebalancing. The yen and yuan are going to benefit from their country's integration into this new alliance structure. Diversification away from single currency concentration is no longer just prudent, it's essential. And let's talk about commodities, because defense buildups require enormous amounts of industrial metals: steel, aluminum, copper, titanium. Europe is about to go on a procurement spree that will affect global commodity markets. If you're not positioned in industrial metals and mining companies that can supply European demand, you're missing one of the clearest investment themes of the next decade. This isn't speculative. This is governments opening their checkbooks for strategic priorities. But there's another angle that many investors haven't fully grasped. Technology giants have enjoyed dominance in European markets not just because they have superior products, but because they were seen as part of the broader Western alliance. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, these companies have massive contracts with European governments and defense agencies. As Europe builds out independent defense and security infrastructure, security concerns that were previously brushed aside are now going to be taken seriously. Expect to see European governments and defense contractors shifting toward European alternatives like SAP, Atos, and Dassault Systems. Now, I can already hear some thinking that this is overblown, that the previous dominant power is still the world's largest economy, that its military is still unmatched, and you're not entirely wrong. But power is relative, and what matters isn't just absolute capability, but the ability to shape outcomes. For 3/4 of a century, one nation didn't just have power, it had structural advantages that made the exercise of that power almost automatic. Allied nations had no choice but to align because the entire system was built around that leadership. That's what just ended. Now we have one power among several in an increasingly multipolar world. The era of automatic dominance is over, and the transition to the new reality is going to be painful, expensive, and disruptive. Here's the fundamental lesson. Real power in the international system isn't about having the biggest military or the largest economy. Real power is about relationships and dependencies. It's about being indispensable. For 75 years, one nation was indispensable to the security and prosperity of the world's advanced democracies. But when you treat allies like clients in a transaction, when you threaten to walk away unless you get better terms, you teach those allies something critically important. You teach them how to live without you. You force them to build alternatives, and once those alternatives exist, there's no putting that genie back in the bottle. In 72 hours, the previous dominant power went from being indispensable to being an outsider in an alliance structure that includes most of its traditional partners. The world has moved on. The implications of this shift will unfold over years and decades, not days and weeks. Markets will gradually reprice assets to reflect new realities. Supply chains will slowly reorganize around new centers of power. Currency flows will shift as demand for different reserves changes. But make no mistake, what just happened was a fundamental phase transition in the global order. For you as an investor, the message should be clear. Diversify away from assumptions of continued single power dominance. Look for opportunities in emerging power centers. Understand that structural advantages certain companies enjoyed are eroding. Position yourself for a multipolar world where economic and military power is more distributed than it has been in generations. The old playbook is obsolete. The new playbook is still being written, but the general contours are becoming visible. What we've witnessed isn't just a policy change or a shift in alliances. It's the acceleration of a historical transition that was already underway, but that has now become irreversible. The unipolar moment is over. What comes next is uncertain, but it will be defined by competition, multipolarity, and the need for genuine strategic thinking rather than the assumption of automatic dominance. Those who understand this will be positioned to prosper. Those who don't will spend the next decade wondering what happened to the world they thought they knew.